Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Porras, and I'm the Senior Manager for Outreach and Education at CAQH Core. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to our CAQH Core National Town Hall webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a few logistical items. You can download a copy of today's presentation from the CAQH.org website. To do so, navigate to the Core pull-down menu at the top of the welcome screen and select the Core Education Events page. A link to the PDF version of the presentation can be found under the listing for today's webinar. On this slide, you can see a screenshot of the attendee GoToWebinar dashboard. You should see something that looks similar to this on the right side of your computer desktop. When joining today's session, it's possible you may have joined the audio portion of the webinar using your computer speakers by default. If possible, we would prefer you to join the webinar audio by telephone. To do this, please select the telephone audio button in the audio panel of your dashboard, and the dial-in information will be displayed. Make sure you enter your audio PIN, which is found under your dial-in information. We will save time at the end of today's program dedicated to responding to your questions. You're encouraged to submit your questions at any time during this webinar by typing them into the questions panel on your dashboard. We ask that when you submit your question, you identify yourself and your type of organization so we can give you a more accurate response. We'll also be taking audio questions from the audience at the end of today's session if we have time. When we begin the audio portion of the Q&A session, you may raise your hand using the hand raise tool found on your webinar dashboard. When it's your turn to ask a question, we'll unmute your line and you can begin. Please hold off on using the hand raise tool until prompted to do so, as we'll be putting all hands down at the beginning of the audio Q&A. Once again, in order for your line to be unmuted, you must enter your audio PIN on your telephone keyboard. So today we'll start off with a high-level CAQH Core Board update, followed by a report on our important work to maintain the EFT and ERA operating rules. Then we'll share information on the Voluntary Core Certification Program, as well as the new CAQH Core Phase 4 operating rules. And last but not least, we'll leave you with some information on upcoming education and outreach webinars, as well as plans for future education activities. Now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, CAQH Core Director, Denise Benning. Denise?
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon and good morning to our participants on the West Coast. If you've attended our town hall sessions before, you know that we often keep the board activity updates at the end of the program. Well, we're going to reverse things a little bit today because it's important that everyone understand the core board and how it functions and some of the key initiatives that they're looking at over the immediate future. So on slide number 5, you'll see we have over 140 plus participating entities across the healthcare industry that comprise the participating organizations of CAQH Core. And as you know, and so many of you are our participants, you're involved in rule development, you're involved in working on the certification test suite approvals, and of course maintenance of existing rules. The core board is also multi-stakeholder with representatives from the healthcare industry at large and includes both standard development organizations and other non-voting advisors. And they have a really important set of responsibilities. For example, setting the mission and vision for the organizations, about the long and short-term strategies, of course, our budget and the bylaws. On our next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the discussions that our board has been having with regard to CORE's mission and vision. And I can say emphatically that its commitment to the mission, to the vision, to the integrated model that we operate under is extremely strong. The CAQH Core has a critical and unique role in the marketplace. We are the authoring entity of operating rules as designated by HHS, and we also are a nonprofit organization that really provides tools that the industry can use to realize the goal of administrative simplification. A lot of our efforts have been driven by the Affordable Care Act of late, and we all know, I think, that a lot of the ACA work has been completed. There still is some remaining to be done, but we are going to continue our focus on innovative maintenance and tracking of our existing operating rules, our implementation support for phases 1 through 4, which you'll hear a little bit more about in the next couple of minutes, a voluntary pilot on attachments to help inform the eventual formal development of a standard, and potential new work that may come out of the ACA-mandated review committee that is looking at the efficacy and feasibility and utility of the standards and the operating rules. So we still need to work towards more market adoption. Just because operating rules are out there, because standards are out there, doesn't mean that everyone is using them. And that really is essential to realize the eventual mission of administrative simplification. We believe that core certification that you'll be hearing about here shortly is essential, and it supports the workflows and partnerships that are key to making that happen. And of course, we're going to be looking at operating rules that are perhaps voluntary in nature until and unless they become mandatory. So we all know that the payment models that we're going to be looking at are changing. And so the workflows, the transactions that support the adjudication of those payment models will change as well. So back earlier this year, the core board did an assessment and came to agreement that core has got to have a future focus on driving unnecessary costs from the fee-for-service data exchange and help the collective exchange needs that is going to be the future of what is evolving as value-based payments, or VBP. A white paper has been developed to scope out some potential roles and opportunities for core to where we can have utility and really support the industry in this transition. So next year, an evaluation of the potential role of the organization in the value-based payment world will occur. And core participants and industry at large really will have a say in this and have input into this because we do have an integrated model, and the processes likely will need to adjust should VBP actually become a reality. So to kind of summarize the board's approach to this, it continues to have a strong emphasis on evaluation, both of future as well as current initiatives, and whether the core should consider how to voluntarily expand its existing operating rules. Should we develop and adopt initial collective actions on value-based payments? And this kind of work is going to be key to looking at not only 2016 and beyond. And I think from this slide you can see they're looking at this from a multifaceted approach, not only the strategic and organizational fit, but who needs to be a part of this discussion from a partnership perspective. What's good timing? How does this fall into other industry initiatives, like, for example, the continuing implementation of ICD-10 and meaningful use coming up? What is the return on investment? And that's a key question that we continue to ask ourselves. Who is going to benefit from this, and how do we quantify what those benefits might be? How do we help the industry to drive participation and ease their way into it in a way that makes sense for everyone concerned? And of course, eventually, what is the goal and expected impact of all of this information? So again, the core board is committed to maintaining the great quality and the current level of support that we help the industry realize with fee-for-service. And as they go forward, we can imagine that when we go into a value-based purchasing or value-based payment world, that their commitment to that will be just as strong and just as supportive. So I think that's pretty much a good high-level overview of what the core board is looking at. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Bowman, our senior manager, who's going to talk about some of those current initiatives that the board continues to support and speak to the mandated EFT and ERA operating rules maintenance update. Bob?
Great, thank you, Denise. And just as Denise mentioned, there are many things that we do that go above and beyond just the rule development and implementation. And in a few minutes, you'll hear about the Phase 4 operating rule, the update on that, as well as our certification. But we also want to make sure that you understand the maintenance process that we have on the previous phase rules. And this includes, for example, just a couple for Phase 3 for the EFT and ERA, which includes updating our core code combinations through our core code combinations task group and our enrollment data task group as well. Those two task groups are continuing their work efforts in maintaining the rules. If we go to the next page, or the next slide, I'm sorry, you'll see that the uniform use of CARCs and RARCs rule, the code combinations adjustment, has had a significant impact, hopefully, for the provider community, and that it helps mitigate unnecessary manual provider follow-up through phone, through updates and lookups at a particular health plan's website. Because beginning with potentially tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of code combinations, applying the maintenance process to 4 common business scenarios, you really do come to a streamlined code set that is much easier for the health plans to implement and maintain, as well as for providers to understand the exact reasons for a particular adjustment to a bill. So not only mitigating the manual provider follow-up, but also the different types of billing processes that happen after the AR has been updated. So secondary billing, write-offs, and collecting copays and deductibles from those patients. It also helps posting delays because it helps mitigate those problems so the providers can better understand the reasons for a particular adjustment to the bill. Going into some more of the detail for the maintenance process on the next slide, we do have 4 common business scenarios that are maintained in the rule. And we go through a maintenance process where there are 3 compliance-based reviews per year, and this is on a triennial update because the CARCs and RARC lists are updated by the code authors 3 times per year. So then we go through a similar process 3 times per year to make sure that they're in compliance. We also go through and conduct an annual market-based review. The annual market-based review ensures that the code combinations really do reflect current industry usage and understanding of how a health plan adjudicates a claim and then renders that information to a provider in a way such they can understand exactly what the adjudication results are. And as Denise mentioned, there are potentially lots of changes to how the payment process is going to be, changed over the next couple of years. So this process can be very important as we address market-based reviews in the future. Some more information about this particular task group is found on the next slide. Again, the task group's goal is to have a continuous process, so it happens continuously throughout the year. It's data-driven focus, so to ensure that the industry is really using a sound process and adjusting the codes and ensuring that there are improvements to the denial management process. As a quick update on some of the most recent work, on October 1st, the task group completed their review for the new code combinations that were published on July 1st, and those were just published again on October 1st on our website. The market-based review was conducted in 2014, was published on June of 2015. So all of those different adjustments were applied to that edition of the code combination set. And we are preparing now for our next MBR, but also the last MBR included new business scenarios for the industry to consider. So we're going to be going through that process as well to consider potentially new business scenarios, not just the main 4 that we have, but potentially new ones. This task group is made up of 50 different entities, participating organizations that reflect really a wide variety of stakeholder types. Anyone that you could imagine is probably participating in this group. They are led by 4 co-chairs representing both providers, national health plans, as well as vendors. Moving on to the next slide, you can see that from this quick update or overview for the latest adjustments that were just published on October 1st, this is the result of our compliance-based adjustment. There were 4 code combinations added, and interestingly, and also important, is that there were 55 code combinations removed, with a net change of 51 code combinations removed total. And why the removals are important is that it does reflect the industry need and change for the code combinations to reflect usage. And so with the even with the compliance-based review, as codes come in and out of usage and ensuring that providers have the best message that they can understand the reason for an adjustment denial, it's important that we both add and remove code combinations to make it as easy as possible for providers to understand those reasons for adjustment. Continue our update on the uniform use of CARCs and RARCs on the next slide, just to ensure that everyone has a clear understanding of the compliance and resources that are available. Once CAQH publishes an updated code list, the industry has 90 days from that publication date to become in compliance with the code set. So since we published October 1st, the compliance date is January 1st, 2016 with this latest edition of the core code combinations. And to ensure that everyone is aware of the resources that we have available, we do have a dedicated web page to everything related to this rule into the code combinations maintenance process. You can also access and download the latest version of the code combinations along with a markup version so you can see the changes from one to the other. And another important thing that we did, especially for the vendors that are on the webinar today, is that we do maintain a similar naming structure for the update so that you can easily set up an API and download this automatically to update any sort of backend systems. Also good for help plans too. Moving on to the next slide, we really do want to ensure that as many organizations as possible do participate. The 50 that we have are great, but we'd love to have even more input. So if you are interested, if you are a core participating organization, you can join the task group and ensure that you're part of that process. I'd say come join the table, but we have such lively discussions. I'd say come join the circuit because it is always fun to make sure that we have everyone's perspective understood and met and part of that discussion. We do meet every Tuesday, every other Tuesday, bi-weekly, from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So hopefully we get some more folks to join that discussion. Other ways to get involved and to participate, as we launch the 2015 market-based review, you can submit a response. Anyone in the industry, anyone that hears my voice on this webinar can actually submit a response if you use and conduct the 835 transaction, if you consume that in some way. So you can submit a response to the MBR and be part of that discussion. So you can make sure that you're part of that because it's really important because we want to make sure that as it is a market-based review, as I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that the changes to the code set reflects current business needs, your business use cases that are in play, as those things are continuously changing. Moving into our next maintenance process, which is going to launch in November, is the EFT and ERA enrollment data elements maintenance process. This maintenance review, similar to what we did last year, is going to kick off in November. Last year, we did conduct a review where we agreed on non-substantive adjustments as well as on key policies for ongoing maintenance. So this year, we will also convene in November to determine if there are any substantive adjustments for the enrollment data sets that are needed. So if you wish to participate in this as a core participating organization, please let us know. You can reach out to us via our email and let us know that you wish to participate as we begin that process. With that, I'll hand the call over to Drew, who will, I think, kick off our next polling question.
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. And this brings us to our first of 3 polling questions that we like to ask the audience. And the first one here, I'll read it before I launch the poll. You'll see the poll come up on your screen that you can answer. Have you or has your company seen improvements in the denial management process due to core code combinations for CAQH Core 360 rule? And this is the uniform use of CARCs and RARCs rule. So I will launch this poll. Please stand by. You should see that coming through now. And we will pause for about 20 seconds here for everyone to log a response. And when that happens, I will share the results. Take about 10 more seconds. Just a couple more seconds. I will now close the poll and share the results. So I'm showing that 56% of you logged unsure. So it seems to be some uncertainty out there. And I would remind everybody to, if you have questions about this, to please email us. And we would be happy to reach out with you and help you with this. And with that, we will go back onto the presentation. And I will share back into the slides here. And now we're going on to voluntary course certification with Matthew Albright, our Senior Manager of Course Certification, and Taha Anjarwala, our Senior Associate of Course Certification. Guys, take it away.
Thank you, Drew. Taha and I are going to tell you a little bit about voluntary course certification, but before we do, we'd like to back up and talk about the ACA-mandated HHS Health Plan Certification of Compliance and give you an update on that since we've had a lot of questions coming in on it. As most of you know, a notice of proposed rulemaking on the ACA-mandated HHS Health Plan Certification was published on January 2nd, 2014. That January 2nd, 2014 proposed rule proposed that for this first ACA-mandated HHS Health Plan Certification, health plans, or more specifically controlling health plans or CHIPs, are required to submit to HHS with a rule called Documentation of Compliance. So for purposes of the next few minutes, the federal mandate and program coming out of HHS we'll call the ACA-mandated HHS Health Plan Certification. You can remember it's the title of the federal mandated program because it's long, it's awkward, and full of acronyms. While the core certification program we'll refer to as voluntary core certification, and you can remember that because it's the one with the shorter, less scary title. According to the proposed rule on the ACA-mandated HHS Health Plan Certification, a CHIP has two options with regard to the type of documentation of compliance it submits. The first option for the documentation of compliance is the core Phase 3 certification. That's the voluntary core certification that CORE offers and has offered since well before the ACA. And the second option is something called the Hipaa credential. Unlike voluntary core certification, the Hipaa credential is something that is newly created with the proposed rule. And as many of you know, in the proposed rule, CAQH CORE was charged with administering the Hipaa credential. In 2014, CORE brought together industry representatives through its certification and testing subgroup to develop the forms that would be necessary to obtain a Hipaa credential. Those draft forms are available through this link on this page. As we probably all know, the rule proposed that health plans report the number of covered lives under the health plan and submit one of these documentations of compliance before December 31st, 2015. However, that December 31st, 2015 and the rule requirements are part of a proposed rule. A proposed rule has no legal standing. It cannot be implemented until a final rule has been published that may or may not adopt the approach and policies proposed in the NPRM. This means that the ACA-mandated HHS Health Plan Certification is not operational. It is not open for business. CAQH CORE, as the proposed administrator of the documentation of compliance, does not, as of yet, offer or award the proposed Hipaa credential. The Hipaa credential is waiting on the final rule to become effective. So now, the big question. When will HHS act on that proposed rule? Well, we likely know only as much as you do. We do know CMS did comment on this publicly in mid-September at a meeting of the National Committee on Vital Health Statistics, the NCVHS, when the director of the group at CMS that is tasked with publishing the regulation talked about the proposed rule and the public comments that came from that rule. She stated that CMS, and I quote, takes all of the comments very seriously, and we will be addressing them formally in 2016. That's the comments that we'll be addressing formally in 2016. There was actually a follow-up question to her specifically about the December 31st, 2015 proposed date and whether it would change, and the director responded, the industry should recognize, quote, that we never to date have finalized the proposed rule. The date that is out there is still just the proposed rule. So more or less what we've been saying so far. So that's where we are. or rather that's where we aren't. Regardless of the proposed and final rules, CAQH Core does continue to offer voluntary core certification, as it always has, and we'll talk about voluntary core certification here next. So, what is voluntary core certification? As a program, we think it's really the gold standard in how a certification program should be administered. As many of you know, certification programs writ large are available in every industry sector throughout the U.S. and world economy and serve as a way to demonstrate that entities and products are meeting the rules and standards that any given industry uses. Voluntary core certification works the same way, but what makes core certification unique are the multiple parties involved in the development and execution of the program. If you look at the bullets at the bottom of this slide, you see elements of a kind of checks and balances for the program. First, the actual requirements that are necessary for an entity to demonstrate conformance with the operating rules, the actual test questions, are developed by industry representatives through a CAQH Core subgroup. Those requirements, those test questions, are then put through the same thorough review and voting process that the core operating rules go through. So this is industry deciding for industry what conformance actually means, and that's important. You have the operating rules, but then you have industry deciding what conformance with those rules looks like. Second, a third-party vendor separate from those industry representatives that develop the test and separate from core is used to conduct the actual testing. And lastly, core administers the program. This includes authorizing the testing vendors and giving a thorough review of the application and testing documents before awarding the seal. So, a balance of power and some systems of redundancy create a solid certification program, which Taha will now tell you about.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Thanks for the good description of what makes the core certification program. So next I'm going to talk to you all about what does core certification mean to organizations. So core certification means that an organization has demonstrated that its IT systems or products are operating in conformance with specific phase or phases of the core operating rules. Voluntary core certification is stakeholder specific and available for providers, health plans, clearinghouses, and vendors, or any other organization that uses, transmits, or conducts the phase 1 through 3 transactions. Stakeholders can currently achieve core certification for the following transactions: phase 1, which covers the eligibility and benefits transaction; phase 2, which is the claim status; and phase 3, the EFT and ERA transactions. Additionally, organizations interested in seeking core certification on the phase 4 operating rules can expect to see the phase 4 certification program launched by CAQH Core by fall of 2016. I'd also like to highlight that as of today, CAQH Core has awarded 202 core certifications, and we nearly have 50 more pledged certifications. Next slide, please. I think back to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Taha. So hopefully you've heard us emphasize that as of now, core certification is a voluntary program. So then, if it's voluntary, why get core certified? Core certification develops trust, gives assurance, and provides a return in investment. In terms of trust, core certification shows your business partners that your systems are applying operating rules that streamline administration transactions and tasks. More and more, we're seeing entities ask their trading partners whether they have been core certified. For assurance, we see growing indications of enforcement from the federal level. In addition to the ACA-mandated HHS health plan certification program, the ACA also mandated audits of health plans for administrative simplification requirements. And for the first time this year, CMS has set up a new division that is aimed specifically at enforcement of standards and operating rules. Anecdotally, we also know that core certification has been used to help with internal IT audits that are required by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Lastly, core certification provides administrative time and cost savings for the entity that is certified, as well as for its business partners and its customers. Back to you, Taha.
Thanks again, Matthew. So I'd just like to highlight with this slide the various entities that have achieved voluntary core certification, and this slide characterizes different entities by stakeholder types. Again, if you're interested in learning about which organizations across the industry have completed or are currently undergoing course certification, you can view a complete list by visiting our website at www.caqh.org. Next slide, please. Additionally, if your organization is interested in learning more about course certification, or you would like to become course certified, please feel free to contact us at core@caqh.org, and we'll be happy to set up a time to talk to you more about course certification. And I'll turn it over to Drew for our next polling question.
Great. Thank you very much, Matthew and Taha. This brings us to our second of three polls today. I'll read it before I launch the poll. And this one is pretty simple, straightforward. Do you anticipate that your organization will become course certified? And I will launch that poll. And it will be open for the next roughly 20 seconds, at which time I'll close it and share the results. So please go ahead and log your response. Take about 10 more seconds. Just a few more seconds. All right, I will go ahead and close the poll, and I will share the results. And it looks like the majority, or 35% of you, have registered unsure, and the next size up, 29%, said yes. And so for those of you who are unsure, please, again, feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. We're always here to help you answer your questions. And we will carry on with the next slides here. And we're going to go back now here to Denise Benning. We'll update on the core Phase 4 operating rules. Denise?
Thank you, Drew. As you all know, the ACA mandated the development of operating rules for the Hipaa transactions. And as you can see from this slide, some of those are already in effect, have been for a number of years now. For example, eligibility for a health plan and claim status has been in effect as of January 1st of 2013. This past year, EFT and ERA went into effect January 1st of 2014. As Matthew indicated, we still do not have a health plan certification final rule, so we're in a holding pattern on that. And then, of course, we have the next phase of operating rules, which, as we know, are the Phase 4 operating rules. They have been approved by the core participating organizations. The board has approved them, but they have not as yet been mandated for adoption. So let's talk a little bit on the next slide about the scope of the Phase 4 rule requirements. And as you can see, an important reminder at the top that what you won't see here are operating rules for health claims attachments. And that's because there has been no adoption of a formal standard for the attachments transaction. And until that happens, we are unable to write operating rules against them. So once that takes place, then we will obviously look towards developing those operating rules, but you won't see those for attachments in Phase 4. The other important thing to note on this slide is that for all of these Hipaa transactions, prior authorization, claims, enrollment, disenrollment, and premium payment, the Phase 4 rule requirements address not the data content, but the infrastructure requirements. And I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I think this is a handy reference point to see exactly the types of infrastructure requirements that are included. And again, I think it's a good reference that you can hold on to and use for your own purposes. So what's the impact of Phase 4 operating rules? Well, of course, it addresses the 4 transactions, claims, prior auth, enrollment, and premium payment, and it offers at least a common method of connectivity or a safe harbor. It employs a minimal amount of time for system availability so it can send and receive data. It includes an acknowledgement to ensure that once the transaction is sent, it's received, it hasn't been lost during transfer, and that it will be addressed. It requires response times for acknowledgement and processing for both real-time and large record batch submissions. And it also has a common format that entities have to use when providing information about proprietary data exchange systems through their companion guides. So as you can see on this slide, it increases consistency and automation. It increases the use of automated electronic transactions. It reduces staff time for phone inquiries, and it definitely enhances revenue cycle management for providers, especially resulting in improved cash flows. So again, very important benefits for using these operating rules. So how do we get to these operating rules? We have a very robust and very thoughtful and planful process from getting to the development of draft rules all the way to a final vote. All of the work by our various subgroups and work groups that develop the draft rules undergo multiple straw polls and formal ballots, repolling, and only those that are indicative of high support move forward into the process. Then there's formal voting by core participating organizations. Those are the organizations that actually create, transmit, or use healthcare administrative data. For this particular voting process, more than 90% of core participating organizations voted. That's a very, very high level of participation, with a resulting 88% approval of the Phase 4 operating rules. Again, tremendous support, tremendous involvement, tremendous results. It's very, very gratifying to all of not only the core staff, but all of the industry representatives who participated in this. It's just phenomenal. And then, of course, it went to the core board, where it was unanimously approved back in September. So that's how we go through the process of making sure this is transparent, thorough, vetted, and approved. And you can see on the next slide the people who were involved, or the types of stakeholders who were involved, how the rate of their participation, and the types of respondents. So we got a very good mix across the board of all different types of entities. We had tremendous support from the government sector, tremendous support from health plans. So this was very, very gratifying in that it showed a wide level of involvement and support for these rules. So we've had a number of questions in our pre-registration questions about when is this all going to be adopted by HHS. As you know, we talked about before, there is a process for this. CAQH Core will update the National Committee on Vital and Health Statistics on the status of the Phase 4 operating rules, and we anticipate doing that probably in early 2016. After that, NCVHS needs to make a recommendation to the Secretary of HHS as to whether to adopt the Phase 4 operating rules. Once that recommendation is made, HHS, and actually CMS, will work to publish an interim final rule regulation, and it will determine the scope of adoption of those Phase 4 rules. Now, of course, with any regulation, interim final or proposed, there's usually a public comment period where people can write in and comment on what the rule says, and that can be publicly noted and submitted directly to CMS/HHS. And then, assuming after that HHS does not decide to change anything based on the feedback from the public comments, industry will be required to implement those operating rules. They usually allow approximately 2 years from the publication of the regulation. So it's a multi-step process. There's still a lot of room for public comment. Again, we don't have any idea as to when adoption or interim final rule might take place. HHS and CMS will have to make that determination. So what's the next phase of Phase 4? As in previous phases, we're not just going to put operating rules out there. We're going to help the industry with a wide variety of educational resources and implementation tools. As we've done with our previous phases, we will provide an analysis and planning guide. We already have a Phase 4 webpage. If you haven't seen it, please go to our website and click on Phase 4. You'll see materials and information there. We're going to do a whole slew of FAQs based on feedback that we get from the industry. Informational webinars, webinars like this, will have the ability to be downloaded at a later date. We'll also have general information on Phase 4 as more some specific topics for Phase 4. Cheat sheets, other unique Phase 4 tools, and of course, CAQH course staff always available to answer your questions. So that, in a nutshell, is Phase 4 as we know it right now. And Drew, I'm going to change it over to you for our last polling question.
Great. Thank you very much, Denise. And this brings us to our last polling question of the webinar. And I'll read it before I launch the poll. Please indicate whether you intend to voluntarily implement the Phase 4 CAQH core operating rules. And I will launch that now. And after it launches, please take a few seconds to register your poll. And we'll stay open for just a couple seconds here. About 10 more seconds. Take about a few more seconds here. All right, I will close the poll and share the results. So it looks like the largest percentage of you need to learn more, which will bring us to our next section, outreach and education. But 29% of you said yes, they are planning on implementing them, and 19 say yes, we're planning on implementing some of them. So I will take us back to the slides here. And actually, this next section will be presented by my colleague, Jessica Porras, and myself, both from the Education and Outreach Department here at CAQH Core. So this is going to help you understand a little bit about what to expect in the final months of 2015 and next year, beyond in 2016. We are always looking to provide many opportunities and resources to assist you, certainly with core certification. And as the last poll indicated, there is a great number of you who are looking to have more information and would like to learn more. So we typically average about 2 to 3 webinars per month. And these webinars are like this, a town hall, but we also have scheduled open mics. We're going to have a thought leader series that we're developing, as well as series specifically on certification. And in fact, next week on Thursday, we will have an informational webinar specifically on certification, and will be very informative, and hopefully you'll be able to join us. And always we are looking to strengthen our partnerships. We always like to bring in outside stakeholders to present on these webinars instead of just CAQH core staff doing all the talking. We like to share the microphone now and then. And so, particularly with 2016, we are going to diversify our educational portfolio. Webinars will continue to be the cornerstone of the Outreach and Education Department, but we're looking to supplement our webinars. So as you might have seen, our website has been upgraded, and hopefully you've been there to check it out. But this is the main portal where we will link you to our educational resources. We're going to develop new educational products, such as videos and e-learning modules to supplement the webinars that we put on. You will see a larger CAQH core social media presence through outlets such as LinkedIn and Twitter. And then we're going to have different ways in which we can analyze and understand better how our educational resources are being viewed and understood out in the field. So we're going to make use of tools such as surveys and instant polling, like you've seen in this webinar, just so we have a better way of understanding and responding to your needs. Because our audience is so important to us, we want to make sure we're developing tools that are useful to you. And Jessica, please go ahead.
Thank you, Drew. So I wanted to share this last slide with you all on the Education and Outreach section of the presentation. and highlight the next few webinars that take us from next week until the end of the year. As Drew mentioned, we have one next week on October 27th, which is next Tuesday. We have one on certification, so I encourage those of you that need a little bit more information on certification to register and tune in next week. After that, in early November, we will have VA join us for a webinar, and they're going to talk about, this time from a provider perspective, their experience with implementing the Phase 3 operating rules on EFT and ERA. So for those of you that have a little bit, want more information on that rule, please, this is a way for you to tune in and learn more. After that, we will have a joint webinar with ASCX 12 and NACHA, where we're going to talk about how we work together to improve matching payments to services delivered. And finally, starting in December, we're going to start having Phase 4 webinars. The first one's in December. Our plan is to start doing these as regularly as possible. We will probably begin with very basic general information, and maybe in February or March of next year, we'll actually start going rule by rule and having more technical webinars. So hopefully this will help you navigate this work. And now I think we've got some time for Q&A. So please submit your questions by typing them into the questions panel on your dashboard. We do ask that you identify the organization you're with, again, so we can give you a better response. And if we have time, we'll take some audio questions from the audience. So you may raise your hand using the hand raise tool on your webinar dashboard, and when it's your turn to ask a question, we'll unmute you. Again, in order for you to be unmuted, you need to have entered your audio pin on your telephone keyboard when you first called into the webinar.
As we're waiting, Jessica, for people to input their questions, I know we had a slew of questions submitted during the pre-registration process. So why don't we try and address some of those while people are still typing? And I think there's one here regarding perhaps TPA that Matthew, you may want to talk to.
Sure. So
repeat the question.
Looks like the question is, will covered entities such as small self-insured employers be subject to the full certification requirement if electronic transactions are handled by their TPA? And so this is an excellent question, and we've been getting a lot of similar questions to this. Of course, self-insured, most self-insured health plans, or even fully insured health plans, group health plans under ERISA, are HIPAA-covered entities. And so the certification requirements do apply, at least according to the proposed rule. Again, proposed rule, we're waiting on a final rule, and there might be some clarity there. But at least according to the proposed rule, it does apply to all HIPAA-covered entities. Now, I think that thinking about the certification requirement specifically, the proposed rule was vague on this, and hopefully we'll see more clarity in the final rule. But we might be able to draw a distinction between the entities that get the documentation of compliance. So, for instance, the core certification, we know that clearinghouses can get the core certification, and carriers, insurance issuers, and vendors can get the core certification. And those are the actual systems and TPAs, systems that are conducting the transactions for the ERISA plan. It could be that we'll see that another entity can get the documentation of compliance that actually does the transactions, and that's the documentation that the ERISA plans can use. I think we'd hope that that would be kind of the framework that was somewhat the framework for the HPID, where certainly self-insured health plans and ERISA plans were required to get the HPID, but TPAs could go in and do some of the administrative obtaining of the HPID for them. So the final answer then is we don't know. The proposed rule wasn't clear on that, and hopefully clarity will come with a final rule. Thank you.
Well, Matthew, while I have you on the mic, I think this is another question for you. The question is there any indication that CMS will support the acknowledgement transaction?
So this is a great question. The question pertains to the fact that for the first two sets of operating rules, HHS deliberately did not adopt the acknowledgement operating rules which apply to the acknowledgments for those first 3 transactions. And the question is, will they do the same with the Phase 4? And certainly the acknowledgments are a major part of the Phase 4 rules. Again, I can't really predict what HHS will do ultimately, and if we remember Denise's slide, there's plenty of room for public comment, and the recommendation letter from NCDHS, and a number of other things that happen through the rule writing that may change this. But let me point out 2 things that have changed since HHS took the policy of excluding the acknowledgments. And I think the first thing that's changed is that there has been a lot of noise from the industry saying how important acknowledgments are, how much money they save, how much time off the phone they save for providers and the like. So I think since those earlier rules came out, we've heard a lot of recommendations, a lot of noise, and certainly the voting pattern from these last operating rules showed that acknowledgments are embraced and that they're necessary. So that's the first change. And I think the second change is it's been a number of years since the regulations have been adopted, and I think both industry and HHS have grown more comfortable with the scope of operating rules and what they can do. And I think we've seen that operating rules can adopt and implement other standards other than just this transaction standard. We see this with the SOAP and WSDL adoption, and that operating rules as a tool can do many things. And I think we as an industry, and again HHS, has learned exactly how an important tool this is and how many different ways it can be used. So I think there's 2 different changes out there that have happened in the industry which make it a definite possibility.
And just to add, this is Denise Benning. NCDHS had expressed earlier their support for acknowledgments, and we're hoping that in making a recommendation to the Secretary to adopt Phase 4, that they would include acknowledgments in that recommendation.
Thanks so much. So this question I think is for Bob. Are there any plans to expand the scope of the CAQH code rules beyond the 4 business scenarios?
No, that's a great question. I think that one thing that the task group did last year was to accept submissions through the market-based review on new business scenarios that should be considered. And for the rest of this year and into early part of next year, the task group will be reviewing those submissions and determining if those potential new business scenarios should be adopted under the core rule through potentially a voluntary approach. So yes, definitely the scope may change through the task group review of the submissions from last year. Building on that for this upcoming year, there may be potentially new ones that come up from the industry through the next market-based review too. So there's lots of potential for some change around the approach for the business scenarios, but it will be a different approach than what we have currently with the 4 that are required to be supported under the ACA. So definitely more discussions to take place, and so I would definitely invite folks to come and be part of those discussions.
Thank you, Bob. And I wanted to take a pause. I know some of you are having trouble finding the slides. They're in the education portion of the core website, and if for whatever reason they're not there, I want you to know that we'll post them as soon as we're done with the website, and also within 24 hours the recording will be available, so you'll be able to, assuming, I know if you have the time, to listen to this once again and follow along with the slides. So let's take another question. I'm going to read the question. There is a new organization within CMS that is focused on compliance with operating rules. What is the name of that new organization?
Matthew?
Yep. So actually, it's right on that slide that we had on slide 23. The name of the organization is the Division of Administrative Simplification and Compliance, ironically. Division of Administrative Simplification and Compliance, and it's actually a part of the larger group called the National Standards Group. So I think you can go on the CMS webpage and find the organizational chart. If you find that National Standards Group, then you'll see underneath it is the Division of Administrative Simplification and Compliance, And that national standards group is the same group that we're expecting the regulation to come out of. And that was the same group that reported to NCVHS about where they were in responding to the formal comment to the proposed rule.
And just to clarify, the scope of enforcement of that group is any Hipaa standard transaction or operating rule, quote unquote, violation. It's the same group before when it was the Office of E-Health Standards and Services that conducted Hipaa enforcement. However, now it's been given a more definitive designation and more structure. So the idea is to really put an emphasis on bringing the industry to compliance with all of the Hipaa standards and operating rules through continued enforcement activity out of this group.
Great, thank you. We have another question that came through that I'd like to read, and this is another certification question. We are a health plan that uses several different systems. For example, we have a separate system dedicated to the premium payment transactions. Can we pursue voluntary core certification for that system, even if we have not received certification for the phase 1 through 3 rules? Please note that other systems perform the transactions included in phases 1 through 3.
That's an excellent question. And it turns out for health plans, we do have a policy that in order to achieve a certain phase of core certification, all previous phases need to have been achieved as well. So you can achieve these. You can go after core phase certification phases simultaneously. So you could do 1 through 4 simultaneously, but you can't achieve phase 4 before doing 1, 2, 3. And in fact, this is somewhat recognized by the proposed rule on the ACA mandated HHS certification because the rule actually says the only core seal that's required or proposed to be required is phase 3, with the assumption that phase 1 and phase 2 have already been accomplished. And we'll apply that same policy to phase 4.
Great. Thank you very much, Matthew. We'll move on to another question. I work for a payer. How can I get my doctors to understand that they have to update their information every 3 months? And I think this is a question for you, Bob.
Actually, I believe that this may be in reference to our solution side for the ProView, where providers would have to update on a quarterly basis the information that they have, their demographic information, all of the data that they've supported and reported in the ProView application. I know, and this is not actually our bailiwick over on this side of the house, so we came to defer this question over to our account managers and provider support group over in the ProView organization. But all providers who do submit their data on ProView are required to update and validate that on a quarterly basis so that health plans can access the most recent information and ensure that the credentialing process goes as smoothly as possible. So it's definitely very important for providers to do that.
Great, thank you, Bob. And I'll make sure that some more information on ProView is passed along to the submitter of that question. And we have another question that's coming in here, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. Is Hpid rule final?
Thank you, Drew. It's a great question because it's simple to be asked, but it's got a complicated answer, kind of.
Usually is,
right? And as people may know, CAQH Core submitted a letter a few months ago in response to a request for information that CMS put out about the Hpid. So the Hpid technically has been finalized, the final rule, but of course there was an enforcement discretion as they came down to one of the deadlines, and then that enforcement discretion was followed by a request for information. In which they asked whether the Hpid was useful in the transactions and in any other uses. During the summer, organizations, including CAQH Core, submitted their information, their response, their ideas about this, and we haven't heard back from CMS about what they're going to do with those responses. I think what this does tell us is that they're rethinking the Hpid, how it's used, perhaps how it's allocated. And so I think we expect that there'll be a response to those comments pretty soon from HHS. All that's to say that although there's been a final rule, that final rule clearly is being rethought, and there is no enforcement going on with regard to the HPA requirements right now.
Thank you, Matthew. Well, because we have run out of time for today, I want those of you who submitted questions that were not included in the webinar, we will submit your question to the subject matter expert, and you will get an answer to your question directly. So I want to thank our speakers, and I want to thank you all for participating in our webinar. And I'd like to leave you with, first, you saw our website and how to contact us, but I wanted to point out this last slide. These are just ways for you to come participate with us and come, help mold the work that we do. Here are some of our web links on the right side of the slide, ways that you can go directly to the information that you're looking for on maintenance, operating rules, course certification. Also in those purple boxes, just some ways for you to engage with us. You can keep listening to these types of webinars, become a participating organization, or become part of the various task groups, and of course, learn and engage in course certification. Thank you so much for your participation, and I will repeat again that in 24 hours the audio will be available, and you'll be able to listen to us once again. Thank you for your attention. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.